Bonsoir et bienvenue une autre fois encore dans Rebrasser, une série qui t'a parlé sous affaires qui concernent Haïti et Haïtiens que Haiti Coalition, pardon, Haiti Response Coalition pote pour nous. Non, moi c'est Naomi Labati et c'est un plaisir pour moi là avec vous à soir. Haiti Response Coalition a dit nous un gros merci pour présence nous à soir. Et objectif série qui t'a parlé ça, c'est pour nous parler de affaires qui concernaient et qui conséquents pour Haïti. C'est une série de monde qui vraiment qui a travaillé pour Haïti et sujet qui concernait Haïti et Haïtiens tout partout, que ce soit en deux pays, et qui a discuté des défis que le pays a subi à travers moment ça et avec petite théorie autour. N'a fait connaître que ça a déroulé chaque mercredi jusqu'à février 2025. N'a remercié partenaires nous, Haitian American Foundation for Democracy, Haitian Bridge Alliance, Roots of Development et Université des Atlantes qui rendent programme ça possible. N'a rappelé nous si nous avons des questions, tant pis utilisez section Q&A qui dans Zoom là et Melinda et Angie a contrôler Zoom à Facebook Live là pour si nous avons des questions pour le cas arriver tant des questions nous yo. Dimanche 12 janvier 2025 a fait 15 l'année depuis Goudou passé à Haïti et changé surface pays d'une façon profonde. Dans le contexte ça, nous avons deux potoriques invités qui pourraient brasser l'idée à soi sous ça qui a passé en Haïti et qui ça qui fait Haïti rive côté lié aujourd'hui. Jake Johnston, c'est un auteur de livres qui relaie Aid State, Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism and the Battle to Control Haiti. Et avec lui, qui a accompagné, nous avons Velina Charlier de Nous Pas Dormi, un féministe et activiste pour droits moun en Haïti et qui toujours tout partout pour avancer droits moun à droit Haïti. Welcome, bienvenue et merci encore. Ma passe bâton by Velina. Bonne écoute.
Bonsoir tout le monde, et nom c'est Velina, et moi ap vive Haïti, moi grandi Haïti, moi remè Haïti, m toujours fait choix rester Haïti malgré genre situation capable difficile. Assoya m'a pas avec Jake. Jake c'est un l'honneur pour me dire que c'est un ami, c'est un monde qui remè Haïti. C'est un monde qui travaille sur Haïti, qui voyage, qui observe, qui tendait, qui comprend. Et à partir de compréhension parle, il écrit un livre sur ça qu'il observe, qui a passé en deux pays, qui sont livres qui dit en pile vérité, qui c'est un livre qui permet pousser réflexion sur qui j'en nous fait atterrir dans la situation nous y est dans le pays, parce que c'est pas un hasard. Sans ne pas parler trop, m'a accueilli Jake, m'a dit tout le monde qui déjà branché et tout le monde qui vient rejoindre nous. Merci d'être que nous là. Activité ça yo possible non seulement parce que y a monde qui prend initiative organisée mais aussi tout possible parce que nous-mêmes nous venons participer, nous venons tendre, nous venons poser questions, nous venons brasser l'idée ensemble. Donc merci que nous prenons temps nous mercredi soir ça pour nous capables de rejoindre nous dans l'activité. Bonsoir, Jake.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you, Velina. Thank you, the Haiti Response Coalition, and to all the many partners I know who are helping put this on and stream it in Creole and English, which is amazing, and over so many different platforms. So, yeah, really thrilled to be here tonight. And I'm going to start just with a short excerpt from the book before we can jump into a little bit more of a conversation. But really looking forward to it, and yeah, hope we can have a good Q&A at the end also. 200 years after the revolution, and the struggle was incomplete, the resistance ongoing. 30 years after Haiti's first free and fair election, the nation's democracy had ceased to function. 16 years after the arrival of the Blue Helmets, the security forces had been hollowed out from the inside, and the wheels of justice had ground to a halt. 10 years after the earthquake, after donors had spent more than $10 billion, after celebrities and political leaders from across the globe pledged this time would be different, Haiti's public institutions had practically disappeared. So, was Haiti a failed state? Jean Casimir, the Haitian sociologist, has long argued the question is itself flawed. What do we mean by state? For Casimir, the Haitian state is about far more than public institutions. It is also the state of community among Haitians. It is the laku, the malancera, the various ways in which Haitians themselves have survived in spite of constant attacks from the state, capital S. And this broader state hasn't failed. Rather, it has endured and continued to stand as a beacon for freedom, despite the unceasing efforts to control it by the aid state and the elite. I think the question, at least when asked about Haiti, is flawed for another reason. Even if we talk only about the state as public institutions, had Haiti failed? No doubt, a select few Haitians had played leading roles. But the state created over the previous 30 years reflected the intervention and interference of foreign actors in the local elite more so than it did the Haitian people. Haiti wasn't a failed state, it was an aid state. Haiti never even had the opportunity to fail on its own. Of course, the failure of the aid state was an inevitability. No Haitian state that excluded the majority of the population was going to last forever, as the revolution had shown the world. But by the 10-year quake anniversary, the aid state had failed even on the terms of its managers. There had never been stability for the masses, but now there wasn't even stability for the elite. Far from stopping migration, more Haitians had left Haiti in the decade after the earthquake than during any 10-year period in modern history. Haiti had even plausibly cost Democrats a presidential election. Like the US occupation, the dictatorship, and these earlier incarnations of the Haitian state, the aid state was failing. But was this even an inherently bad thing? For Haitians to build their own state, their own sovereign democracy, the collapse of the aid state is a necessity. And while insecurity and violence were reaching new heights throughout the country, so too was the grassroots organizing. In rural communities, some still recovering from Hurricane Matthew years earlier, in the popular neighborhoods of the capital, many once again red zones, in universities, high schools, and even middle schools. At the 10-year anniversary, few saw beyond the failure to see the bigger picture. In failure, there was hope. And across the country, citizens were taking action to build something new. If I had learned one thing over the decade I've been coming to Haiti, it was that a state imposed on the population was never going to work. The resistance was winning, just as it had in 1804. None of that meant change would be easy or would happen overnight. After the collapse of the Duvalier system, it had taken more than 4 years for a legitimate election and the rise of Aristide. Now, the next incarnation was collapsing. And whatever followed it, for better or for worse, would only happen after a long and likely violent struggle. And so, I wrote that. That's sort of the end of the book. And for those that don't know, the book came out almost exactly a year ago. But I had to finish writing it well before it actually came out into the world. And so that was written probably like late 2022. Right after Ariel Henry had first requested foreign intervention. And obviously, we could see at the time where things were going. But it's obviously gotten significantly worse in the years since then. But I thought that would be a good place to sort of start this conversation and sort of introduce the topics that I discussed in the book. And yeah, looking forward to taking it from here, Velina.
Yeah. Merci, Jake. Pense sa ki intéressant nan sa ou sot li ya, nan extrait livre la ko sot li ya, li montre qu'on gon compréhension de Haïti. Donc, on pense avant même que nous t'en aller nan parler précis sak nan extrait ak sak nan livre la, première question c'est pour qu'ils sont écrit livre ça? Qui raison qui poto qui dit m'a vin Haïti, m'a observé ça qui passé, faut mettre ça qui passé, ça me senti, ça me comprendre sous papier. Pour qu'ils sont écrit livre ça?
Yeah, thanks, Velina. I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, I live in Washington, and to be perfectly honest, right, I mean, at the time of the earthquake in 2010, I had never been to Haiti, right? I didn't know much about Haiti. I had colleagues who did, and I worked for this organization in Washington. And what they realized very quickly after the earthquake was that whatever came next was going to have a lot to do with decisions made in Washington, right, where we were, and not just decisions made in Haiti. And so I think, like everyone, we were looking for how to engage, right? How to help in our way. We don't provide services. We're not an aid organization, but what could we do from Washington? And that job fell to me. And the initial job was trying to answer the question, where did the money go? We were talking to a lot of organizations in Haiti, and I recognize a lot of folks from those early conversations on the call tonight, and hearing, right, just about this big disconnect between the sort of narratives, the rhetoric we were hearing in public and in the U.S. media versus what people on the ground were actually saying, right? That billions of dollars, but we haven't seen any of it. Money for this, but we need money for that, right? And so what was causing that? Where was this disconnect occurring? And, the reality was that we actually had better access to information in Washington and speaking English than most people in Haiti had, because the documents about the money, the planning meetings about the money, these things were all happening in English and largely from organizations based in Washington. And so that was really the beginning of this now about 15 years, almost exactly 15 years of tracking those aid flows. And what that sort of led me to was really a much deeper understanding of the effects of aid, not just inefficiencies and things like that, but how, after going to Haiti and again and again and again and seeing it over this long period of time, what the long-term effects of this response really were. And, frankly, it was just a story that I didn't see anybody paying much attention to in the US. And, there was so much attention on Haiti after the earthquake. And, with each passing year, that attention faded more and more and more. And yet the story I felt was getting more and more urgent. And so again, there was this total disconnect. And, hopefully the book can start to fill that gap a little bit.
Merci, merci un pile, Jake. Na continue sou so ap di, sou koman pat genyen en koneksyon entre sa ka pase Haiti, besoin Haiti te genyen avec ça qui t'a planifié Washington, ça qui t'a planifié dans pays étranger. Nan sa ou sot dit à l'heure ou pose question pour dire est-ce que Haïti faillit? Et est-ce que son l'État qui faillit? Et ou dit que l'on pose question ça, l'on parler avec sociologue tant que Jean Casimir, li toujours questionné pour le dire qui ça nous entend par pays qui faille, l'État qui faille. Parce que définition ça pays, ça l'État en Haïti, l'on observe Haïti, li ka vle di en pile bagay. Et Jean Casimir parlait de la Pouyo, il parlait de Madame Sarayo, donc de l'économie informelle là, de pays qui continuaient à vivre. Tant que si pays sont l'État qui parallèle avec l'État avec grand L là, state avec grand S là. Pas vrai? Donc, ça m'a envie qu'on ait dans observation par et dans ça qu'on rapporté dans le livre là, côté que ou même tout, ou vient questionner parce qu'on dit que résistance là a continué. Dans le sens comme si tu as même sous-entendu dans lecture ça, que c'est pas seulement résistance qui a continué, c'est que révolution a continué. Parce que le poko fin by nation, l'État doit bay là. L'on gade Haïti ça qu'on observe, comparé à Haïti nous t'a dit que yo défini li faillir. Ou dit Haïti pas jamais vraiment te gagné une opportunité pour faillir pour compte. Si nous pousse réflexion là, qui ça qui a amené à faire une affirmation comme ça que Haïti pas jamais gagné opportunité pour faillir pour compte?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I write from a perspective of Washington, right? Really, and the role of the U.S., right? And so for me, and we, this sort of going back to your first question, why Haiti, why me, right? I mean, for me, I'm not writing a history book about Haiti that Haitians are going to learn their own history from, right? I'm writing about U.S. policy towards Haiti. and how it affects Haiti, right? And that is not the entirety of Haiti, of course, right? There is plenty else to go into that much larger equation. But I think, in this, specifically with Haiti, and I think this is not unique to Haiti, but I think it is magnified in Haiti. You can't ignore the role of international actors, and it's really, I think, almost difficult to overstate the influence of international actors. And when I say international actors and use these terms, we're talking about the United States, really, right? I mean, we can talk about the UN, other countries, but really, the policy is all being directed, for the most part, by the United States government. And so it's, I think, critical to understand that. One, because I don't think you're going to be able to change things without understanding those power dynamics, right? And the role that international actors play, because they're a key actor that Haitians who are organizing are going to have to confront in their own efforts to change the dynamic. But also because I think it also restates the role of international actors here, and the the responsibility of international actors to change their own behavior, right? Because I think for so often when talking about Haiti, and when Haiti is discussed in DC and whatever, Paris, Ottawa, wherever, it's always, oh, well, Haiti's this, Haiti's that. It's not our fault, it's Haiti's fault, right? And that has an impact. It has an effect. It's whitewashing and sort of, erasing the role that international actors have played in perpetuating that, in creating the conditions we see today. And that's not just theoretical, right? So what I talk about a lot in the book, the role of the sort of post-quake response. And I think people think about wasted money, money going to big contractors, big salaries, things like that. Okay, we wasted money. But that's not the only answer of where the money went. The money also went directly for political things. And we could see the role of aid, for example, in the 2010 and 2011 election, that electoral process, which occurred right after the earthquake and was greatly influenced by the broader relief efforts. But you can't honestly look at that electoral process, certainly in hindsight, and say Haitians chose a new leader in the aftermath of the earthquake. They didn't. And a new leader was imposed upon Haitians through a process where participation was less than 20%, where millions of people were disenfranchised and didn't have the ability, let alone, the actual documentation or legal sort of ability to vote. And yet a result was given, right? And so that's what we mean by, this isn't all Haitians failing. This is also international actors failing and contributing to that state failure. And if we ignore that and put all of the blame and put all of the focus on the role of Haitians in that, and ignore the role of these international actors, then it's exceedingly likely that these patterns will continue.
C'est intéressant qu'on conclue comme ça, parce que ça mène dans le prochain questionnement. C'est que malgré qu'il y a un livre comme ça qui écrit, il y a l'autre document qui est publié, qui clairement montre interférence communauté internationale, là, particulièrement États-Unis, Washington, gagné dans politique en Haïti, et conséquences désastreuses, mauvais effets que interférence a eu gagné dans politique là. Nous quand même gardé, bon, nous dans début l'année 2025, mais toute l'année 2024 et année avant yo, politique ça pas changé. Politique que Washington gagnait, que li appliqué sous Haïtien, pas changé. Et j'en so dit dans extrait à l'heure, où t'es fini sous une phrase côté où dit que changement a venu, mais changement probablement a grand pile violence qui à travers changement. Ça qui t'a mené nous à poser question sous dans lecture pour nous so observer dans pays a, nous so écrit dans livre là, dans chapitre 19 ou parler de bandit légal, qui rapport qui gagne entre état qui a aidé ça, aid state, avec violence que nous vivons en Haïti et économie violence et tout trafic illégal qui est capable seulement fait dans situation violence côté nous y aujourd'hui.
Yeah, there's a lot there, Velina. I mean, I think, to start, right, I think you're right. We don't see the change in policy. And I think, this is part of what I write about in the book is that the acknowledgement that this has failed, right? That US policy is failing, has failed. We've sort of we've gotten over that hurdle, right? Like people accept that now. Okay, yes, it didn't work. It's not working. We messed, but how do you actually change that? And, I think what that really shows you is how resistant to change these systems have become, right? That this is less about one person implementing their policy or their choices, right? These are the systems that we as in the United States, we as the international community have built over time, and they are resistant to change. And so, as an example, I talk about local procurement, right? I mean, this idea that more aid money needs to be going to local organizations and not just to the same 5 big contractors in Washington every time. Well, I didn't come up with that, right? I mean, that's not some revolutionary idea. I mean, everyone in Washington agrees with this, except those people who are getting the money right now and who are benefiting from it. And in the current system, they have tremendous power. So when USAID tried to direct more money to local organizations and take money away from these big contractors, well, the big contractors grouped together, hired a very influential lobbyist with close connections to the administration at the time, and the Obama administration, and lobbied directly against those reforms. So you had USAID giving money to companies who then lobbied against the common sense reforms that everyone agreed to. And the companies won, right? So even though we all recognize it, they still won. These are the kind of things that we're dealing with to actually see that change manifest on the ground. And I think, what we see in place of real change is rhetorical change, right? So now the US supports a Haitian-led solution, right? Of course, everyone's favorite term these days, Haitian-led solution. I remember a conversation in Washington. This was with Henri, was the prime minister, right? And of course, yeah, he's Haitian. And I had a US official directly say, well, is this not a Haitian-led solution? Ariel Henry's Haitian. And so you can see that you can frame that, you can use that to whatever end you would like, but that doesn't mean the policies themselves have actually changed. And that's what we've yet to see. And I think, in the second part of your question, you talked about sort of the bandi legal and the sort of criminality. And obviously we're seeing so much of that on display now, with the arms trafficking that has just flooded the country with guns. Those are all coming from the United States, right? The pervasive role of drug trafficking in Haiti, which is sort of, rarely talked about, but everyone acknowledges and knows in Haiti the role that it actually plays in politics and the economy. Why haven't these things changed? It's not dissimilar to that story with the aid industry, right? There are people that benefit from this, both in Haiti and abroad, and those interests have proven to be exceedingly strong at preventing the kind of change that I think most people, whether they be American or Haitian, recognize needs to take place.
Et si nous continuons dans le livre là, en fait, lecture livre là est très difficile dans le sens que c'est son miroir de qui genre corruption endémique en Haïti, c'est un miroir de qui genre impunité endémique en Haïti, pas vrai? Ça qui a mené à faire un parallèle dans temps qu'on y a, alors commencer travail sous le livre là finalement sorti, te gagné tout gros mouvement reddition compte sous Petro-Caribé ou parler sous qui Jean l'argent gaspillé après tremblement de terre dans livre là, ou parler donc dans tout l'argent gaspillé ça yo. Bien entendu, il y a l'argent Petro-Caribé qui gaspillé. Et ça vient amener à poser question, et ça vraiment, c'est perspective, ou c'est pas nécessairement un bagage qui est dans le livre là, parce que c'est plus récent. Sous efficacité, sanction, n'a toujours décidé de politique que a appliqué pour Haïti ou gagner communauté internationale là, que ce soit États-Unis, que ce soit Nations Unies, qui décidait bon qu'on y a pour le servir à sanction, et puis il servi à sanction presque tant coup et si moun wap di m'pa bossuret encore. Pas vrai? Donc, m'te vle gen perspective ou par rapport à jodi a, en 2025, côté sanction bay, impunité est toujours encore plus grave que Jean Takaye en Haïti. Et qui sont l'autre écrit livre là, côté observé, qui jodi an, après sanction, montrer que vraiment pas gagné yon changement. Plus n'a avancé, c'est plus n'a entré dans trou.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really important question, and I want to say a few words about Petro Caribe first, because I think this fits so well, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, but not in super great detail. And I don't obviously talk much about the sort of protest movement and things like this. That's sort of the very tail end of the period of time the book covers, obviously. And so I mean, I think Petro Caribe and then the focus on Petro Caribe in terms of this push for accountability, I think tells us a lot, because Petro Caribe was an alternative aid program, right? Compared to most bilateral aid, multilateral aid, right, which bypasses the government, which bypasses local organizations. Petro Caribe was different, right? Money actually went to the government, and in a lot of ways, that's positive, right? That is exactly what we want to see from other aid flows, right? Is you need to work through the government to strengthen the government. If you keep working around it, you're only going to continue to undermine it, right? And so here was a program that came around with lots of money and with a very different approach. And that was a potentially sort of groundbreaking thing that could really change the narratives around aid and how it's administered to present, an alternative. And obviously that's not the way it turned out, right? I mean, and we know the sort of, squandering of those resources, the wasting of those resources. But, there is a reason why I think Haitians focused on Petro Caribe, because it was their government that actually had the money, right? So if, whatever, another aid agency comes in and gives out money and it's going to the Red Cross and World Vision and, a bunch of NGOs and foreign entities that are not Haitian, it's really hard for Haitians to actually try and hold those entities accountable. I mean, who do you go to? It's not your government. You don't vote for them in elections. They're not accountable to you. They're accountable to other actors and external actors. And that's a big part of the problem there. And so I think, it's also maybe you can see sort of one of the benefits of actually working through the government is it gives citizens the ability to hold their government accountable for how aid money is used. Because it's a lot easier to, at least, I mean, obviously we can talk about the impunity and the sort of inability to actually implement accountability in that context. But to demand accountability of one's own government is much simpler than to demand accountability for an international NGO that is not actually accountable to Haitians at all, right? So that's a really sort of interesting dynamic, I think, with the Petro Caribe stuff. And specifically on the sanctions, I think this is a really interesting question. And it is, I think overall, it has not been a terribly effective policy, right? I think in general, the United States relies upon sanctions. And just to be clear, right, the Haiti sanctions are individual sanctions. They're not countrywide sectoral sanctions like we see on Venezuela, on Cuba, on Iran, right, on other countries. These are individual sanctions. So the sort of wider negative humanitarian impact of them is less than that, right? But I think, I don't think that we've seen sanctions have a particularly strong effect in terms of changing behavior. I mean, and it's really hard to know the specifics, right? Did this one individual who we all believed was financing gangs and then get sanctioned and named stop financing gangs? Well, the armed groups still exist and they're still getting guns. So somebody is doing that work, right? Did he not? We don't necessarily know that. But I think there's a bigger issue here, right? And we saw the United States and the State Department stand firmly behind corrupt actors in Haiti for decades, and now want to present themselves as the arbiters of who is good and who is bad in Haiti. And that can be moved, that can be pressured, and that can be targeted to people who, in certain cases, we might agree is a nefarious actor or a bad actor. But empowering the United States to pick winners and losers, to have that control over who they deem acceptable or not, what we've seen in other circumstances is that power gets abused, right? It gets abused by the United States. And so it can be useful at times and for certain purposes, but it can also be weaponized against. And so I think it will be really interesting to see, if a strong independent voice emerges from the current situation to run in an election whenever it might happen, that goes against the U.S. interests. But the U.S. is sanctioning all of these people. Does that person get sanctioned, right? And what's the basis for those sanctions? Because I think, we talk about impunity and this corruption and how it perpetuates itself. The sanctions are not a stand-in, right? They don't actually mean accountability. It's naming and shaming, and there can be some value in that, but it's not holding people accountable for actual actions, right? And so, again, the potential for the United States or other actors to abuse those sanctions to play politics and to use them as a form of political interference, I think is extremely high, even if there can be, obviously certain benefits to people. And we've seen, recently, Michel Martelly, Laurent Lamotte, these former leaders, who I wrote a lot about in the book about all of these corrupt acts that they're involved with. And so, it's not surprising to me to see their names on these sanction lists, but, that doesn't change the history. That doesn't change the fact that they were there because of U.S. support. And the U.S. can change today. That's what the U.S. does. You're a U.S. ally until the day you're not, right? That's how it goes for everybody. But should those advocating, on these issues, is that, do we want to further empower the United States in sort of picking these winners or losers? I think is a really important question to be asking today.
En parlant de interférence et gouvernement, particulièrement gouvernement américain, dans les affaires politiques en Haïti, n'a toujours été en 2025. De plus en plus, il y a une conversation qui a fait sous transformer mission qui gagne aujourd'hui à Haïti et MSS là, avec Kenya, transformer le temps qu'on mission la paix. Dans le livre là, quand même, livre là, passé dans un moment côté te gagné casque bleu en Haïti. D'ailleurs, dans un petit extrait au tout à l'heure, on parlait brièvement de ça. Et dans chapitre 26, si mémoire bon, je te mettais une petite note dans le livre là. Chapitre 26, moi, mes titres en pile. Titre là, relé The Apology. Et ça veut dire, demander pardon. OK. Et là-dedans, dans demander pardon, on pensait ça qui était très intéressant dans sa codie, c'est que en 2013, je dis à nous en 2025, en 2013, le ministère a parlé, il était senti que mission était accomplie parce que processus démocratie a continué parce que il était metté Jovenel Moïse et il était installé comme président. C'est ça dit dans la première page dans chapitre 26 qu'on nous parler de demander pardon. Jodi en 2025, malgré tout ça qui dit dans le livre là, malgré gens ou expliquer et vraiment m'inviter tout le monde à lire le livre là parce que lire les États a aidé aide state pour une raison parce que c'est toute catastrophe aide humanitaire fait en Haïti que le livre a parlé sous lui et jodi n'a reparlé de tourner avec en mission la paix ONU qui vision sous ça qui sont pensées sous ça.
Yeah, I mean, we're here again, right? I mean, I think, I'm glad you brought up that bit around, MINUSTA and them claiming success, right? That this was the sort of feather in their cap from a decade was the election of Jovenel Moïse. And I think, I was there, I was in Haiti during both the first election that had to get thrown out because of fraud, and then the second election, which was right after a hurricane and nobody voted in. Right? I mean, I was there on the ground. I don't think you could find somebody who actually thought that this was evidence of a success, right? Unless they were part of Jovenel's campaign, they weren't going to tell you that. I remember traveling through the south of the country right after the hurricane. Even on election day, there were people, across the street from a voting booth, right, from a polling center, and say, "Hey, are you going to vote?" No, why would I vote, right? My house just got destroyed. I've got no support to do that. I'm focused on this. I don't even care about what's happening here. And yet for the UN, right, that election was their final success, right? The sort of cap on a 10-year plus experience in Haiti that cost billions of dollars. And that disconnect, right, is what we keep seeing and keep hearing, right, over and over and over again. So, now we are in a situation today where I think, again, people look at Haiti and it says, okay, it's violent, it's chaotic, it's dire, right? We need to do something. What can we do? So what do we reach for? The things we know, which are troops, right? Security. That's the kind of support that we understand. That's the kind of support that we've given in the past. And so we're right back there. And I think, for me, it's that's not a solution, right? It was never a solution. I think today you can trace much of the current situation to the last security intervention, right? Because, and I think we talk about this concept of stability, right? So MINUSTAH was the stabilization mission, but the question that never gets asked is stability for whom, right? Who are we providing stability for, right? Who did MINUSTAH provide stability for? Was it Haitians writ large? Was it the population overall, or was it the political class, the people who were holding power at the time, a small section of the economic elite who were benefiting from the status quo? That's who they provided stability for. That's who benefited from that. And the reinforcing of that dynamic, perpetuation of this, one of the most unequal societies on the planet, I think explains the violence, right? The chaos that we see today is a sort of natural response to a system that was never going to work, right? That was not working for the Haitian people. And so, doing the same thing again, is not a solution. It's also, to the extent that it can provide some short-term amelioration of security concerns, right? These are band-aids. And it's not to say that can't or wouldn't at all be important, right? I mean, like the ability to just go outside, to have some space to breathe, right, is important and can be useful in its own right. But in terms of addressing the sort of structural issues, the root causes of what we're seeing in Haiti today and what we've seen for a long time, a peacekeeping mission is not going to address that, right? And I think that's quite clear. And so I think, one thing that we've seen throughout history, right, is that Haitian leaders have sort of, they've adapted to their reality or their perceived reality, which is that the US and the international community is the most important constituency, right? So they're trying to appeal to international actors for their support to keep them in power, and not the Haitian people who should be the arbiters of who is actually in control of the country and who is exercising political power. And that involves both sides, right? That's not just about US policy, international actors. That's also about Haitian leaders and Haitians and how they respond to these and how they can wield that power, right? Or change those dynamics from their current position. But unless that happens, right, then I think what's most likely to occur with more peacekeeping efforts, more money for security, is that it will be used how it was in previous interventions, which was basically to protect the status quo, to protect those in power now, and actually sort of serve more as an excuse not to implement the changes, the reforms that are necessary to actually address the population's concerns. Because when you have foreign security support, you don't need to do that to keep power, right? You have the security in place. And I think that dynamic explains a lot of what we've seen, right? So you had MINUSTAH left. Okay, so then you had the Haitian police. This was what was supposed to emerge from this intervention, the stronger Haitian police that provide security. But the Haitian police had been really drastically politicized and hampered from all sorts of different reasons. And so it couldn't provide that stability for the status quo that MINUSTAH had. And so as it faded away, you saw the political enemy funding armed groups, right, as the stand-in, because without some force, maintaining that status quo was impossible, right? Maintaining their positions of power was impossible. And so you saw it sort of go from international troops, local armed groups, right? Then the armed groups turn on you, right? They get more powerful and say, hey, why are we listening to you? We can do our own thing. You say, okay, now we need to start at the beginning and get the foreign troops back, right? And so, okay, we can go through that cycle any number of times, but is that a solution, right? Is that actually a path that's going to change the trajectory of where Haiti is headed? I don't think so.
Et c'est intéressant qu'on dit ça parce que li amène nous à rappeler tout le monde yon caractéristique que Haïti gagne, que en pile fois le monde dit le fort et yo gade un petit jan mal parce que yo pas vle ou mette mot qui du sur une réalité qui du, mais Haïti en réalité son pays qui n'a apporté et son apporté social et économique qui établi et envie tourner dans même cycle là pour aller rechercher étranger pour venir mettre sécurité, premier monde qui allait vers solution ça et c'est pas peuple haïtien. Peuple haïtien, l'op gade nouvelles, l'op tande nouvelles, l'op gade qui gens yo réagi face à violence terrible y a fait face à lui-même. Non, yo allé dans extrême jusqu'à bois calé. Mais m'pa quoi j'aime ouais peuple haïtien dans la rue a fait manifestation après les en moué mener MINUSTA tourner par exemple. Par contre, toujours classe politique là, toujours mafia économique là, premier bagay que yo relé c'est mes amis al chercher sécurité en l'autre côté, menen vini. Parce que c'est gagner un statu quo et gagner une façon pays à organiser que à tout prix depuis 1804 faut que yo kembel comme ça. M'a passé dans quelques questions moun yo te posé qui sous chat là et puis après ça m'a fini son petit phrase livre là que me pense qui vraiment important pour nous parler de lui. Alors gen moun qui posait question qui demandait qui objectif vous pensez tête calé gagner avec activité lobbying yo dans Washington et est-ce qu'on peut expliquer qui genre ça a fonctionné?
Yeah, I think this is it's critically important, right? Because I think if there's one thing Haitian political actors understand is the importance of Washington, right? And they all spend the money and the time and the resources to try and influence things in Washington, right? And it's not just Tekale, it's not just the people in power, it's business connections, right? It runs the gamut, and you know, I mean, I think really those objectives are going to change always a little bit, right? I mean, not everything is going to be exactly the same, but for the most part, right, what is the intention of those lobbying activities is to convince Washington that you are the right partner, right? That you are the trustworthy person that the US can work with and, you know, can implement an agenda, right, and can get things done for them in Haiti. That is the basic pitch that people are making in Washington, right? Is I'll be your good ally, right? I'll be your friend and I can do this and I've got support and so I can do it, right? And then, you know, I want to add this into this because I think it's a really critical thing in terms of how this works. And it shows you how this is, again, it's just like it's grown, this system of influence and the sort of formal and informal, right? Because there is a whole range of people who are basically selling Washington support, right? Or access to Washington. Haitians predominantly, right? Who say, I'm the one who has the connection here, so listen to me, right? And you can see this on full display in the assassination in 2021, right? Where just about everybody involved in that assassination was convinced or says they were convinced that the US was supporting them, right? But of course, none of them actually met with anybody from the US government, right? I mean, that's not it. It was just, we got word from this person and that person. That's a whole industry of people sort of selling that. And so there's the formal lobbying, you know, the hire the lobbyists to go around the hill in Washington. But there's this whole sort of shadow lobbying network in Florida and Washington and New York of influence peddling, where people are trying to basically sell access to Washington for Haitians. And that's a really dangerous game that has gotten a lot of people in very, very bad situations. And I think in this current environment right now with Haiti, we're seeing it to sort of an unprecedented level, where there's, you know, a lot of people trying to angle to say this or that. And I think with the change in administration now here in Washington, that is likely to grow. So as much as sort of a word of warning to be wary of anybody telling you that they've got the support of the United States government.
Yeah, especially nowadays. Yeah. Mpwese so diyan interesant, te gon lota bagay ki pase kon sa tou, coup d'État Tiboua, kote yo te arrêté en pile moun, et c'était avant assassinat, yo te arrêté en pile moun, et au final, c'était yon gren moun qui était dans prison, qui t'a orchestré tout bagay là pour le dire que li représentait ambassadeur américain, et ambassadeur américain dit demain matin, c'est où la mette président, et puis moun yo a font complot pour te essayer faire. Ça montre influence que États-Unis gagnent, mais ça montre tout comment des fois, tout bagay là décidé Washington. Et puis, li vin appliqué Haïti. Li pa bay résultat, nous fait constat ça déjà. Ça qui mène non l'autre question que moun audience lan pose, gen moun qui mande, est-ce que li pa ta pi bon si toute parti honnête ta sorti Haïti et puis yo quitté Haïtien résoudre problème yo. Pour compte yo.
Yeah, this is a question I get all the time. Obviously, I am extremely critical of U.S. policy, of foreign aid, and so the natural thing is, okay, so do you support cutting all foreign aid, right? Total isolation policy, and I don't think that's the answer, and that's not to say that there couldn't be some positives from certain actors totally withdrawing from Haiti, but that for me, right, the vision is not that there's no role for external actors or outside actors to stand in solidarity with Haitians fighting for positive change, right? I mean, I have a global worldview. I mean, I want to stand in solidarity with people all over the world who are fighting for positive change. So the isolation is not the answer, but I think it's more the changes need to happen on that side, on our side, and less on the Haiti side, right? Like, okay, I mean, Haitians can change. That's up to Haiti, but for those trying to help, for those trying to engage in Haiti with Haitians, how to go about it? Is it better just to say, no, we can't do anything, or to try a different way? And I mean, I think there are positive examples. There are external actors and outside actors who have found a way to truly support Haitians in their own fights and in their own endeavors, right? And that work is possible. It's harder. It takes more work to do, but it's possible. And so I certainly don't want to paint an overly broad brush by saying, everybody who's trying to do foreign assistance is evil or doing bad, right? That's not the case, and that's not the case at all. And so I think it's more about what changes need to be made so that support is actually effective in achieving the outcomes that you want to see.
Merci de ce qu'on dit ça, c'est vraiment intéressant parce que en pile fois, nous très critiques sous aide internationale ou bien sous Kembe on l'État nan assistana, moun ka pense ko vle di non, tout moun vire de nous quitte Haïti fait ça la fait. Pourtant, j'en so dit à l'heure, gan pile bon exemple de travail qui fait, mais travail yo fait dans respect, yo fait dans l'esprit solidarité et yo fait avec moun qui vinn coûter qui ça haïtien besoin. J'en dis li prend plus temps parce que li prend temps pour apprendre kon pays pour apprendre qu'à tendre ça moun yo vle et pour qu'apprendre qu'à travailler avec yo sorti en bas, river en haut pour joindre bon résultat. Gon moun qui m'a des questions et questions yo aller yon avec l'autre, ça qui quand même intéressant. Il m'a dit qui t'a intérêt principal pour États-Unis continuer à aider Haïti alors que tout le monde connaît que aide la pas marché ou bien parfois il fait situation en vin pi mal. Est-ce que c'est parce que Américain vraiment généreux ou bien est-ce que bon l'autre raison derrière et envie aider ça?
Yeah, I think the first thing I think we have to understand about foreign assistance in general is that it is not primarily about helping other countries. It is primarily about U.S. interests. And, say for aid from the European Union is primarily about the EU's interests, right? This is not unique to the United States. Countries pursue their own interests, right? I mean, that's the policies that they do. This isn't a conspiracy. It's not, some big secret. You could go onto USAID's website and it'll tell you that it is designed and there to promote U.S. economic interest and U.S. foreign policy objectives. That's what it says on its website, right? So this is not, I'm not putting on my tinfoil hat here, right? It's all there. And so I think, yeah, it's really important to sort of stop and understand what that means, right? And so, yeah, our food aid policies have decimated local agriculture in Haiti and contributed to migration, which ostensibly is the thing that the US cares most about. So why do we keep doing that? Well, because there are also agricultural interests that have a big, interest in continuing to get subsidies for their goods and send them to other countries and open up new markets. Right. So there are different interests, things. I think people sort of think about the US government as a monolithic entity with one interest or, that can focus like this. And it's not really how it works. There's a lot of different agencies. There's a lot of different interests. They're often competing with one another. They're often fighting with one another. And so you can get this sort of schizophrenic policy and be like, this makes no sense. Why is the US freaking out about migration and then pursuing policies that only contribute to more migration? This makes no sense. Well, yeah, you're right. It does make no sense. But there are reasons why those policies continue. And so I think, that is a big part of it, is that even if they're not effective in terms of delivering results for Haiti, they are largely effective for other things, largely US interest and sectoral interest, right? I'm not talking about like overall US interest or American interest, right? What are just, I think there's a huge interest in a stable Haiti, right, for the US. But these little interest groups that capture certain parts of the policy space and perpetuate those things, those policies that end up cutting against what, I would consider sort of broader US interests. And the other fact, I think I just want to touch on this because migration is obviously such an important issue for the United States. It is generally sort of pointed to as the most important thing, or the thing the US cares most about in Haiti is stopping migration. And I have a slightly different take on this, which is that it's not stopping migration. It's stopping domestic political blowback from migration. And so what I mean by that is that the US actually requires some migration out of Haiti because the economy is basically exists because of remittances. If you actually stopped all migration out of Haiti, pretty soon the economy would collapse and things would be even worse. And that would be against the US policy objectives, right? So you need some migration. This is how the system is able to continue and perpetuate itself, is by letting off some of those people, because it can't take care of the people that are there, let alone 2 million more if those people were not allowed to leave, right? So it's not stopping migration. In fact, migration is a key part of the US's stability strategy for Haiti. But what they don't want is a political effect in the US from that migration. And so that's why you see that escalate around electoral times and around big waves of migration. So we saw that, for example, around Del Rio. We saw that in the early 90s. We saw that in the 80s, right? Where these big waves of migration from Haiti became political liabilities here. And that's the thing that the US and US policymakers are trying to avoid. It's not stopping migration. It's stopping the political effects of migration here. And that is an important distinction, I think, to point out.
Oui, très, très, très important. On voulait bay deux exemples sous ça, on dit, côté nous parler de, c'est pays qui a intérêt, et là, yo impliqué dans l'autre pays, c'est pour intérêt. Yon nan exemple que me toujours bay, parce que c'est mon la Tibonite, c'est exemple du riz. Haïti, jodi si mémoire bon, n'a corrigé si moi fait erreur, Haïti c'est quand même troisième pays qui achète plus du riz dans la Floride. J'ai 44 ans, moi songe le petit moun, c'est du riz qui te produit dans la Tibonite haïtien te kon manger. Te même gen préjugé sous du riz qui sorti Miami. Jodi c'est l'inverse. Du riz Miami tellement envahi Haïti à travers politique Bill Clinton, on l'autre fois encore yo te ba nou en apology. Yo te demandé pardon parce que Bill Clinton te fait en belle petite vidéo côté il crier pour demander pardon parce qu'il écrasé du riz haïtien, mais un fait est que du riz américain établi dans le pays et il servi intérêt agriculteurs américain nan cause dure. Sous immigration, on voulait faire pour ça à tout. Le politique immigration Biden nan vin rive ça que haïtien relé communément programme Biden, mais c'est humanitarian power là. Ça nous-mêmes nous vivons comme résultat programme ça en Haïti, c'est que c'est vos pays à vider. Programme nan terre long programme humanitaire, mais pour nous-mêmes dans Haïti, c'est pas moun qui pi nan besoin yo qui bénéficie programme nan nécessairement. C'est moun cerveau yo te capi utile pays d'Haïti. C'est tout niveau dans entreprise privée, c'est tout niveau directeur, tout niveau manager, c'est yo même qui aller avant, moun qui des fois gagne un diplôme et licence, un diplôme maîtrise, des fois même doctorat. Donc, il y a des conséquences. Li bon pour les États-Unis parce que li ba yo main-d'œuvre qualifiée à bon marché. Li très mauvais pour Haïti parce que à chaque fois, c'est recommencer pour remplacer cerveau sa yo nan construit pays. Donc, nous devons ajouter aspect sa yo parce que nous trouvé c'était vraiment intéressant que Jake te manié sous 2 points sa yo. Nous avons l'autre question que nous prend qui dit comme ça, pour qui ça plus fort dans officiel State Department américain qui a créé politique envers Haïti, pour qui ça est aussi incompétent et aussi inadapté.
Yeah, that's a good one. James, is that you? I think that was James. Yeah, good question, James. Yeah. You know, I mean, I don't want to be too harsh. I mean, yeah, sure, inept, naive. I mean, I think you know we could use a lot of words to describe U.S. policy in Haiti, but you know, I actually, you know, I had an experience. I'll answer this through a sort of an anecdote here. And I was in a meeting. Occasionally, you know, U.S. government people do actually ask me for my thoughts on things, and I was in a meeting with not a lot of U.S. government officials who focus on Haiti, and myself and a few other people were sort of giving, you know, a briefing about our analysis of the situation, and you know, I mean, it's a very similar analysis that we've been talking about here, basically, and somebody who was there, you know, raised their hand and said, hey, you know, I really appreciate this. I never think about the bigger picture, right? I'm just given a task, and that's what I do. And the task that they had was like, you know, I needed to make sure an armored vehicle was on the tarmac by next week, right? And like in Port-au-Prince, that was the job they had, and that's the only thing they were focused on. And they never sort of stopped to think about all of these other things, right? How that fits into politics, how previous interventions were informing this, right? And I think that's how the U.S. government works, right? I mean, it's policy may be set up here or, you know, have some conversation, but the individuals who are actually implementing it, it's very disparate. It's split up. It's individuals are making very discrete choices and activities, and they're not thinking about the picture. And that's by design, right? This is, in fact, right, in the U.S. Foreign Service, you can't serve in one country for longer than a couple of years. It's because they don't want you to get attached to a country. They don't want you to actually know the country that well, right? And that's a problem, right? I mean, like, I get it. We can understand that. But in terms of actually understanding a place, understanding how your actions, you know, what the effects of your actions are, what the sort of unforeseen or expected effects can be, you need to really understand a place. You need to be thinking about these bigger picture items at the same time as you're doing discrete, smaller tasks. And I think the reality is that in the U.S. government, that's not how it's designed. And it's not designed like that for a reason. And that's what produces really bad outcomes most of the time. But, you know, it's rarely the individuals who are in a position to be able to do much different.
Yeah, merci un pile, Jake. Bon, c'est l'État américain, c'est qu'on ça le construit quelque part tout. Comme on qui dit, en tant que chercheur et un citoyen américain, on connaît des fois gain bon, des fois gain mauvais côté dans interférence politique américaine dans affaires Haïti, dans affaires politiques en Haïti. Est-ce qu'on ouais un futur qui possible côté États-Unis continuer coopérer avec Haïti, mais non façon qui bénéficiait tous les deux pays yo, sans que pas gagner une influence sous prise de décision et en général sous politique, sous économie et sous valeurs culturelles yo.
Yeah, I mean, of course, yes, right. I mean, I think, I think I can come across as a pessimistic guy. This is not maybe not the most uplifting book to a lot of people, but that's not how I see it, right? I am actually quite optimistic and have a lot of hope for Haiti, for the US, for the changes in both of our countries that I think are necessary for those sort of shared values and shared progress. So yeah, I mean, I do think that's possible. I think it's going to take a lot of work to get there on both sides, right? This is not just if only US policy changes, things are all better, or if only things in Haiti change, things are all better, right? This is that trying to explain that everything needs to change, right? All of these different actors are going to need to change for things to move in a different direction. But can that happen? Sure. And I mean, I think, one very practical thing that I think would go a long way, right now, the US has basically total power in the sense that there isn't another entity, country, whatever, that has a different policy towards Haiti than the US. So even countries that traditionally are sort of at odds with the US on any number of other foreign policy or issues in their own countries, talking in particular in many cases around the left in Latin America, have largely gone along with US policy towards Haiti, right? And so what that has done is really limit the space that is available to Haiti, because if some external assistance is necessary, and in a resource deprived place, like there is some degree of support, technical, financial, whatever, that can be helpful. But if the only thing being offered is from one powerful actor, it gives Haiti very little leverage in that bargaining, right? In that negotiation. They're sort of forced to accept what is given as opposed to negotiating from a position of strength. That hasn't always been the case, and I think there is the possibility to change that dynamic. I think even we're seeing maybe a little bit of that with Colombia taking more of an interest, and from a very different perspective than the US, explicitly sort of against a security intervention and trying to have different sort of conversations. If that could lead to some of the Latin American left sort of having a different stance towards Haiti, acting as sort of some balancing factor for Haiti's foreign policy, I think that could go a long way. China is another example, right? I mean, how can Haiti make new alliances and new friends to give it greater strength and greater leverage over the friends that it is forced to interact with? So, I mean, I think the relationship between Haiti and the U.S. is not going to end. It's not going to disappear. There are strong ties, the diaspora, for, I mean, any number of reasons, historical ties, et cetera. That's going to exist. But it can change, right? That relationship can change. I think it is going to change. I think it's inevitable that it will change. It's a matter of the timing.
Merci, Jake. Nap vire nan liv la encore, parce que là nous ap travail sur ti conversation ça, m'te recevoir des notes de différents amis, et ça t'est vraiment frappé que on passage dans livre là qui t'est marqué aux amis tout. Donc, je trouve c'est intéressant pour nous parler de lui. Je pense que le temps intéressant peut-être pour nous bailler moun qui pas nécessairement lire livre là perspective, ou t'as parlé sur Richard Moss, conversation fait avec Richard Moss qu'on relatait à partir de page 295 dans le livre là particulièrement, et surtout sous dernière phrase ça que Richard finit avec lui, côté que il dit qui j'en fait connaître que révolution a continué toujours à Haïti. C'est que li kachita sous galerie là et puis li ouais l'en met toujours. Moi c'est ça t'a intéressant pour font ti parler sur ça.
Yeah. That was a great line from Richard. And for those who've been to the Olafson and hung out on that balcony, you can probably imagine the view and see the view. And it is beautiful, right? But you're not actually right on the water at all, right? I mean, you're quite a ways from the water, but you have that perfect view. And I think there is this sort of tension in Port-au-Prince, right? It's a very different dynamic than what you see in a lot of places, especially in the Caribbean and elsewhere, right? Where the sort of beachfront properties, right? It's these big high-rise hotels and it's the sort of touristy area. And that's not the case in Port-au-Prince, right? It's all of the sort of, right? It's the slums, it's the impoverished neighborhoods, the popular neighborhoods that are sort of lining the coast and surrounded by industrial manufacturing, right? And the warehouses and the ports that are all owned by the elite. And so I think that geography of Port-au-Prince helps us understand the power dynamics in Port-au-Prince and also that ongoing fight, right? I mean, I think so much of this connects to that. I mean, and it's hard not to sort of go down that road without sort of stepping or dabbling your toes into the conspiratorial, but like looking at what's happening to downtown Port-au-Prince right now, and with the context of understanding that the elite in Haiti have wanted to empty downtown Port-au-Prince of the civilian population for decades, right? And they're achieving it today, right? And so maybe we need to stop and think about that a little bit, right? Is that part of this? Is that part of the dynamic that we're seeing right now? Who is going to benefit from that, right? Even if they weren't the cause of it, they're certainly going to be trying to take advantage of it, right? And so those power games, those dynamics, I think are really important, not only in explaining sort of how Haiti got to the current situation, but also understanding where things might go from here, right? Is that tension that still exists, and that I think is in many ways, explains a lot of what we're seeing today.
Yeah, it is the apartheid. There are many,
and that's exactly what Richard said, right? I mean, yes. That's what I mean when I say the status quo, right? That this is unsustainable, that this can't continue. It because that is unsustainable, because you can't have an apartheid state and expect it to succeed unless you brutally repress the population, right? Through one form or another, through foreign intervention, through foreign security forces, through your domestic security forces, through armed gangs, right? Whatever it may be, you need to control that population through force if you want to perpetuate an apartheid system. And if you can't, then it's going to collapse, because there's no way a population is going to accept that. And I think, really that is, I sort of, for this look in that excerpt where we started, right? Is I think, in a lot of ways, the sort of collapse of the aid state, right? The collapse of this system is not in and of itself the problem, right? In the sense that it is a process of transition that Haiti is going through. And in many ways, it's a necessary process of transition. And that's not to say that this is good or right or justified. I mean, like, the daily reality that people have to live through is obviously an abomination and has to stop, right? But thinking about that in terms of a long-term transition to a new form of governance, and I think the reason why that is a violent process is because people will fight to their death to protect what they had and to prevent that change from taking place. And so, that's not the only dynamic right now. That's not the only thing that's happening, but I think it is certainly a key part of what is driving the violence of today.
Yeah. Loli aid state gen un paquet constat qu'on fait. Ou fait constat corruption, ou fait constat impunité, ou fait constat gaspillage l'argent citoyen. Parce que le pays tant qu'aux États-Unis a mette un paquet cob en Haïti, à la fin des fins, c'est l'argent citoyen américain qui a rentré en Haïti, qui pas réglé rien, qui a dilapidé, qui a gagoté, mais c'est l'argent citoyen américain. C'est l'argent ça qui a venu en l'autre pays, et c'est l'argent ça qui a venu mettre des ordres dans le pays. Ça, c'est constat qu'on fait. Loli aid state. Regardez Haïti, côté lié jodi dans l'année 2025, avec quantité violence qui gagne, et t'as l'heure parlé de lui brièvement, le fait que Zamio sorti en Floride et pour la majorité, yo rive Haïti, y a perpétué violence et violence ça li gen met, c'est-à-dire c'est pas un matin nous lever et puis bandit commence à tirer n'importe où pres. Li gon côté que banditis lan sorti et jodia ou senti anti-gens que moun yo perdu contrôle violence là. C'est-à-dire qu'on y a ou senti que yo vin victime de propre jouet pa yo. Pendant, avant nous finir conversation et que nous allons sous deux dernières questions, si tu as parlé avec citoyens américains qui t'a voulu gagner une influence sur un changement politique étranger par rapport à Haïti, qui t'a voulu une influence sur qui côté le cas mettre pression, qui ça le cas dit parce que c'est l'argent qui a financé ça, quel que soit ça qu'a fait en Haïti, qui sont t'a dit?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously something I focus a lot on and think about a lot, right? And it's not easy because I've just spent an hour and a half talking about how difficult it is to actually change these systems, right? How entrenched the powers that be are, and yet I don't think that those things are impossible to change, right? It just means that we need more people pushing for that change, and so I think there's a really key role for people to play at any level, right? I mean, people calling their member of Congress and just saying, I care about Haiti, it has an impact, right? Because so much of this just happens in the shadows, right? It is the reality. It is difficult to get people in this town in Washington to think about Haiti, to care about Haiti. There's other things going on, there's other interests, whatever. And so it really goes a long way just to be able to show that people care about this, and that takes standing up and saying I care, right? And so even if you don't have something super specific to advocate for, to push for, it's saying, hey, pay attention to this. Hey, just do something. Hey, think about this. Look at this, right? Read this article. And just sort of getting that out there into the world, I think plays a really positive role. And the other thing that I just want to say is, right, this is not, and we talk about foreign aid and the problems of foreign aid. This is not unique to Haiti, and that's maybe the best evidence that we have that this is not a Haiti problem, right? It's not that Haiti is uniquely corrupt or uniquely underdeveloped or uniquely poor. That's not why aid doesn't work in Haiti, because this happens everywhere, even in places that are richer than Haiti, that are more developed than Haiti, that are whatever, right? So it's not about Haiti, it's about the policies, and those things can be changed. And so again, I think it's not just about but people can push on that too, right? These are things that U.S. policymakers and members of Congress can actually change. And if they hear from enough people that it's something people care about and they want those things to change, then they'll respond to it. I think we sort of underestimate how important constituent pressure is in this country, right? We think of politics as sort of really divorced, this insider game in Washington, and that's true to a large degree, but it doesn't take that many phone calls to a member of Congress's office for that member of Congress to do something, okay? And you can have a really big impact with small numbers if you're committed to doing it and pushing it all in one direction. And so I think there's a huge role for advocacy to play in changing these policies, both with regard to Haiti specifically, but also in general on foreign aid and foreign assistance and how these things actually work.
Pense nous pas qu'à finir conversation pour nous gagner là, pour nous pas profiter et poser questions sur m'konnen Washington, m'konnen travail Washington, gen gros changement qu'a fait Washington et ne serait-ce que changement présidentiel là. Et son énorme changement de parti, son l'autre plus gros changement toujours. Et puis, de façon générale, on grand remontée de extrême droite, de racisme, de monde qui ouvertement a parlé de politique et raciste. Qui sont pensés ça capable d'impliquer pour Haïti?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think to a certain extent, we have no idea because who knows what is coming and what is going to happen, right? And maybe that's the case always, but I think especially right now, I mean, the sort of ideological incoherency and sort of just disparate actors and interests that are present in the incoming administration that look like they will be present in the incoming administration means guessing which one of those interests and individuals might win out on any particular issue is a guess, right? I think the most clear impact is going to be on the Haitian diaspora, right? Obviously, and through the you mentioned the sort of xenophobic, racist immigration policies that we've seen, and then sort of this really ugly turn in U.S. politics around these issues. It's a little inappropriate to even say turn. This has been part of U.S. politics for a long, long time, and even very directly on Haiti. So it's not entirely something new, but we've seen that before, and I think that that's obviously going to be really impactful. I mean, not just for Haitians living here in the United States, but also that does have an impact in Haiti as well, right? As you know, and deportations have continued under the Biden administration, record numbers. They're continuing from the Dominican Republic. The numbers are absolutely jaw-dropping. The numbers being deported from the Dominican Republic, 275,000 last year. That's 750 people a day. That's insane, right? And that puts stress on Haiti. That's going to have an impact on Haiti. So those policies, though they are sort of most acutely affecting people maybe here in this country or elsewhere, that will have an effect on Haiti. Talking earlier about remittances as well, right? I mean, over 20% of GDP is coming from remittances. Last year it was a record in terms of remittances. How will that get affected by that? In terms of actual policy, right, towards Haiti and U.S. foreign policy, I think that's where it's anybody's guess, right? I don't think that it is inherently going to be worse, right? I mean, we were just talking about how policy wasn't changing under the Biden administration, how they were implementing the exact same policies that had led to the failure and repeating those same mistakes. Is there more room for pushback on that? Is there room for dissent? Is there room for change? Potentially, right? I think the reality is that U.S. policy to Haiti has been largely bipartisan for a long, long time. And so it hasn't changed much, Democrat or Republican, because they're largely pursuing the same policies. I think the biggest change is that you are far more likely to see members of Congress, in particular, push back on U.S. government policies going forward. And we saw that under the last Trump administration. You had more than 100 members of Congress sign a letter about corruption and the Petrocaribe scandal. You mentioned La Saline and the massacres that were taking place and calling for accountability. You had over 100 members of Congress signing on to letters, about Haiti under the first Trump administration. Now, as soon as the Democrat came into office, the policy didn't change, but it was 5 members of Congress signing those letters, right? And because they don't want to criticize their own party, that's the reality, right? It's politics. And so I think there is an extent to which having Trump in the White House will mobilize Democrats to actually care about some of these issues that they should be caring about and don't when it's their team in power. And, that's not a great dynamic, but I think it will be interesting to see sort of how that plays out. And if we can get some actual attention, from the U.S. government and from members of Congress on the situation in Haiti moving forward.
Merci, Jake. Tout à l'heure, faut me montrer mes livres là. Background me blur. OK, mais mes livres là, acheter l'île, l'important. Merci. Merci. Acheter l'île, débattre sous l'île, rencontrer entre nous, parler sous lui, ça quand nous donne très intéressant, lui permet de commencer des conversations très intéressantes sur Haïti. Jake, est-ce qu'on a l'autre livre à écrire qu'on y a sur Haïti toujours?
Another book, no, a few pieces in the works. But also just want to say that it is a long process and it's not imminent, but we are in the process of getting the book translated into Kreyòl, and we'll have that and distribute that totally free as soon as it is ready, and we'll keep everyone updated about that too.
Merci en pile pour ça. M'vle qu'on finisse sur une question que yon moun te posé dans l'audience là que me pense que très intéressant qui ka aider nous et faire mes conversations et sur une bonne note. Situation nous la donne qu'on y a Haïti. Qui quand on pense la privée, est-ce que ou même dans perspective pas ouais et ti graine l'espoir pour Haïti?
I do. I do. And I think it's perhaps increasingly difficult too, right? And I'm talking to people all the time, every day in Haiti, and I know how hopeless the situation can feel, and I think in the present, right? And I don't want to say I have hope and to downplay that reality that people are facing, right? But I do have hope because I think because of the conversation we've just had, right? And all of these dynamics, I think change is inevitable. I think there's no way that this could last forever, right? I think it's sort of both true that people underestimate how much worse things can get and also underestimate how quickly things can change for the better. And so, I think it's not to say that tomorrow everything will be better, right? I think that it's unrealistic, right? That this is going to be a process, and it's an increasingly ugly and deadly process that is, devastating in so many ways. And yet, I do see that hope, right? I mean, I see it with the people who I'm talking to who are organizing to try and do something else, right? The people who are just able to survive in the midst of this is exactly that sort of different state, right? That hasn't failed, that still exists. The community's caring for each other, right? Taking people in. You're hearing those stories too, maybe less so, but I think, if you're in Haiti, you're hearing those stories. And, I think we all can do more to try and uplift those stories right now. There is plenty of hopeful stories amidst everything else that we're reading. And we don't always see that, but I think it's definitely there. It doesn't mean that those forces of hope are going to win tomorrow, but I have no doubt that they will eventually prevail.
All right, Jake. Peut-être dernière question toujours me poser, surtout le parler sous travail on moun fait. Ou écrit livre là, ou parler en pile sous livre là, ou participer dans pile entrevue et sous livre là. Est-ce toujours une question qu'on dit tête ou, mais pour ça, pas poser une question ça. Qu'on a envie de poser ou que nous pas de poser ou, et que peut-être vous voulez parler sous ça?
Oh, I don't know. I think you've asked me all the questions I want to be asked. You're spot on moderating. This has been a treat. But I mean, I think it's this is this is not a unique story, right? I mean, I just want to stress this, right? It's like I went to Haiti and I listened to a bunch of people tell me this story, and then I wrote this story, right? But it is their story. It's the analysis that I got from people in Haiti, right? That I'm sharing to a U.S. audience. This is not some earth-shattering analysis that I came up with, right? I mean, this is what Haitians have been saying for centuries, and I just am trying to explain it to a U.S. audience, right? That doesn't know necessarily that history. But this all exists. It's all out there. This isn't some big conspiracy. This is all sort of in plain sight if people just want to actually read the fine print. And so we're trying to draw some light onto that, and hopefully we're doing it.
Merci un pile Jake, c'est un gros plaisir pour moi. Et nous avons rendez-vous semaine prochaine. Tout le monde faut venir participer encore, mercredi 15 janvier, sous expérience qui doit servir une leçon. Réponse urgence et puis impact qui était après tremblement de terre 2010 là. Donc information yo sous chat là, lien pour inscrire sous chat là, lien pour acheter livre James là sous chat là. M'vle di Naomi merci, m'vle di Melinda merci, Angie merci. Puis gros merci c'est pour ou même Jake avec pour tout le monde qui t'a écouté nous. Merci.
Merci à vous-même, Velina. Merci pour belle modération ça faire. Et belle conversation qui est très importante. Jeudi, nous avons rendez-vous chaque semaine, chaque mercredi, même l'heure, pour prochaine discussion rebrassée qui pourra parler de toujours continuer à commémorer et tremblement de terre là. So, pour semaine prochaine, nous avons Beyond Lessons Learned, Emergency Response and Lasting Impacts. Expérience doit servir une leçon, réponse urgence et puis impact qui était en après. Merci à Response Crisis Translation, Christelle et Debbie. Merci pour l'interprétation nous pendant suivre et discussion, hein, n'a rappelé encore que visiter haitiresponse.org pour capable rester au courant de sujets qui parlent débattre dans l'autre édition qui va venir. Merci tout le monde et merci pour tout le monde qui a participé, posé questions, qui stimule les conversations encore plus. À la prochaine. Bonsoir. Merci encore tout le monde.